discrepancy between consumer beliefs and behaviours. You go up there. Oh, do you want to walk around with her? Okay, thanks.
This is an odd looking, no, just a photo. It is an odd looking clicker, isn't it? So it's that way and then that way? Rightio, okay. All right, hard act to follow, Mike. Okay, so the ethics paradox is looking at the difference between ethical beliefs and behaviours. It's quite a theoretically based presentation. I apologise for giving you something quite heavy last up. But really what I'm trying to understand here is the ethical decision-making process. So trying to, without having people under an MRI to get inside their brains as best as possible, try to piece together the literature and the things we already know and use survey-based research to try to understand the sorts of decision-making processes that people follow when they move from ethical beliefs through to ethical behaviours. So the key contributions are based on looking at consumer ethical judgments in marketplace misconduct. So that's things like, there are the four actual dimensions ranging from illegal activity like shoplifting through to much less ethical behaviours that would be considered something that most people might do. So one of the examples is using an interior designer's ideas but not paying them, for instance. So across those four different measures of ethical behaviours, beliefs rather, do I think that that is unethical? And if I do, am I also someone who would be someone who behaves in a pro-environmental or a pro-social sense? So most of the research has looked at beliefs and behaviours within context. So I have green attitudes or green beliefs, so I have pro-environmental behaviours. So that's what most of the research has done. And I really wanted to see whether if you were sort of good in one context, would you also be good in another? That was one of the drivers of the research. So the other thing theoretically based about the consumer ethics scale, which is the one measuring the ethical judgments, it has predominantly been used as a dependent variable, so it hasn't been used as an independent variable like I've used it here. But also I think it is often misused in the sense that sometimes when the papers are measuring it for consumer ethics, they're really talking about doing good and feelings ideas of doing good and thinking about these, it gets mixed up with these pro-environmental and pro-social behaviours, when really I think it very distinctly measures marketplace misbehaviours. So one of the things I wanted to achieve with this behaviour is, with this paper, is to really distinctly say this scale is really measuring marketplace misconduct, and it does achieve that. So there's statistically different scales. I've introduced moral disengagement and internal locus of control as mediating and moderating mechanisms. Moral disengagement is unlike the rationalist theories like theory of planned behaviour. It assumes that humans are not rational and tries to understand why they do these irrational things. I've introduced balance theory as well and looked at balance theory and moral disengagement as complementary theories. So this is the model. Locus of control is introduced before moral disengagement as the moderator, and I'll explain that to you a little bit later why. So in terms of economic significance, so practically what does this mean? To illustrate, if this represents a percentage shift in ethical consumption behaviour across the total global ethical labels market, for instance, if that was the consumptive behaviour we were using, that would translate to an estimated $254 billion reduction in ethically motivated market activity. Obviously that number is going to change depending on the size of the market that you're measuring, but it does have a significant impact economically. In terms of the hypotheses development, as I was saying at the beginning of the first presentation, there has been a move in the literature from the dark side to the bright side, which was originally looking at consumer reactions to unethical practices. That was the first idea of, oh, what do people think about unethical things? Then it moved towards unethical consumer behaviour, looking at fraud and those types of shopping misbehaviours, which is the marketplace misconduct I'm talking about, through to consumers as agents of change. And predominantly that's the research we're sitting in now, this idea that consumers are the ones that need to be making the difference. And so that's where the emphasis is now. I think rather than that being an evolution, now it's very much two different streams of literature and should be recognised as such, that really unethical consumer behaviour is quite different to consumers as agents of change. I think they're different things. And I also think that, as you're pointing out, it really should be seen as upstream versus downstream, not necessarily conflating everything as putting all of the responsibility onto consumers versus businesses and systems. So what do we know now in ethically questionable and ethically minded consumer behaviour? So within context, belief, behaviour, consistency, we know that green attitudes do predict pro-environmental behaviour. So within context is already known. We also do know there's a relational context, belief, behaviour, consistency. So in some of the organisational behaviour literature, employees who are supported, who feel supported rather by their organisations, are more likely to engage in pro-environmental behaviours that the organisation offers. And also consumers who perceive firms as overpriced are also less likely to engage in green behaviours or green schemes that are offered by their organisation. So balance theory is used to explain that people who have ethical beliefs are more likely to have ethical behaviours, even across contexts, because we like to have harmony across our belief systems. So balance theory explains things in a triadic measure where, in this case, you've got the consumer's ethical beliefs in the marketplace misconduct context and the ethically minded consumer behaviour in the pro-social, pro-environmental contexts. And that is what leads to the hypothesis that consumers who hold stronger ethical beliefs in the illegal dimension of consumer ethics are more likely to engage in ethically minded consumer behaviour, and I expect that to follow through all the different dimensions of ethicality. So when balance theory, when you have an unbalanced state, balance theory says that you will either adjust your ethical beliefs to align with behaviours, or you will modify your beliefs to conform with the behaviours with the beliefs, or you'll rationalise the discrepancy between the two. And when you can't rationalise the discrepancy between the two, that is when moral disengagement is introduced. So moral disengagement, which is a mediating variable, that is a self-regulatory cognitive process that allows people to transition from ethical believers to ethical transgressors. So Albert Bandura, who originally developed this construct, was originally trying to understand why people who consider themselves ethical people or kind people were able to go to the gas chamber and hit the button and then go home and sleep at night and still consider themselves ethical people. So that's where that research started. It's predominantly been looked at in criminology and organisational behaviour. Now more of it is being moved into the consumer behaviour context. So what we do is we morally recode to suit the situation so that we don't have to live with the uncomfortable feeling that we're doing the wrong thing. If we didn't morally disengage, I guess we'd be in the fetal position and we'd never get out of bed. So to some extent, I think moral disengagement is genuinely a protective mechanism for humans, but it's also something that we use to make our lives a lot easier. It's one of the things that explains a lot of unethical behaviour. So there are 4 different loci. I haven't got time to go through all of them, but one example, for instance, in the behaviour locus, you reconstruct your morality by elevating the act to something moral or honourable. So as an example, if you bought fast fashion from H&M, you're not contributing to the environmental catastrophe of sweatshop labour and too much fashion that we don't need. You're elevating the low economic situation of people who can't afford on-trend fashion, because why should people with money be the only people who can afford on-trend fashion? So we know that moral disengagement is associated with a number of marketplace misbehaviours and negative socio-ecological contexts. So therefore, strong beliefs regarding to consumer ethics trigger moral disengagement, which in turn leads to less ethically minded consumer behaviour in environmental and CSR contexts. So the moderating variable is internal locus of control, which is both a personality trait and a self-belief system. So those that have an internal locus of control believe that their actions dictate life events, rather than external locus of control, which means that you believe life happens as a result of luck or fate or God or government forces or something along those lines. So I want to understand whether locus of control internally strengthens or weakens consumer resistance to moral disengagement. So there were 2 ways that this could go. I didn't actually predict a direction here. Either internal locus of control could have, and probably the one I actually thought was really going to happen, it's related to self-efficacy and personal self-control, personal agency. So therefore, I thought most likely that internal locus of control would mean that people could resist moral disengagement. So I'm not going to give in to the justifications and the sort of bullshit that I tell myself that then leads to the unethical behaviour. I'm going to stand by my beliefs, and I'm going to follow through with the behaviour that I know that is right. That is what I thought would happen. The other option that could have happened with internal locus of control is it could empower individuals to rely more heavily on their personal judgment when they were navigating the ethical decision-making processes. So therefore, they prioritise their own ethical conditioning and their own reasoning over the broader societal norms. There was actually, and I kind of struggled to come to this idea. I didn't think that that's what would happen. And then I came across this paper by Todi that also found that internal locus of control moderated the effect of ethical sensitivity on ethical judgment. And they also predicted the same as me and couldn't actually really come up with a good reason why it hadn't worked. So I'm not going to go through the method. I used regression analysis. So using process models. I would like to go through it, but I haven't got time. So I'm just going to basically tell you what happened. So consumer ethics and ethically minded consumer behaviour are positively correlated. So all things being equal, balance theory does explain that consumers across all 4 dimensions, so all levels of ethicality from shoplifting all the way down to no harm, no foul, will be ethically minded across contexts, because people want to align ethical beliefs and behaviours. When you introduce moral disengagement, that changes. So moral disengagement is introduced and people become ethically unethical, but only in the 3 most unethical dimensions. So in the no harm, no foul dimension, it's kind of what everybody does, like everyone kind of does that, so I don't need to engage the moral disengagement. It's not activated, so therefore that was not significant. But when we introduced locus of control, internal locus of control, it actually did reduce moral disengagement. So they were more resistant to moral disengagement, but instead of increasing ethically minded consumer behaviour, the overall effect was still more negative. So they were still more unethical, which I really struggle to get my head around. And I think the reason is because what they're doing is abandoning the societal norms, because the consumer ethics dimensions represent societal norms of this is what I think is the right thing to do in a marketplace misconduct situation. So they say, well, I don't need to conform to those. I make my own mind up about what's right, and that's what I'm going to do. And as it turns out, what I'm going to do is the unethical things. I'm not going to go through the theoretical implications because they're less interesting than the practical implications for this audience, I think, and I'm running out of time. But the practical implications is that ethical congruence in marketing communications is good, so strengthening psychological alignment between consumers' ethical beliefs in marketplace misconduct contexts with pro-environmental behaviours could increase engagement with sustainable products. I think it also gives the feeling to me that if you want to convert people across contexts, it can possibly be done. So as an example with, say in the US, where you're not allowed to talk about diversity, equity and inclusion, you want people to be better in that context, maybe you can talk about something, you're not allowed to say those words, but maybe you could say some other things that are sort of like it, and you'll still get the same behaviour results, possibly. I think that's what the research indicates. To counter moral disengagement, develop strategies to minimise the opportunities for people to rationalise those ethical choices, including marketplace misconduct. But this one here is a good example of an old campaign, Let's Stop It at the Start. It's just a very explicit example of how moral disengagement's used, where they've got she's just overreacting and they've crossed out overreacting and saying sticking up for herself. So it's a very explicit example of how moral disengagement can be used in a campaign. Brands can clearly communicate their ethical standards and practices because it aligns with their ethical beliefs. Might reduce the likelihood of moral disengagement. Marketing emphasis can be placed on not with the societal norms, but with the belief systems that align with the individual. That's what I think the internal locus of control is saying. So we need to understand the individual's beliefs more so than the societal norms. So this is very contrary to a lot of the things that I've heard over the last couple of days. So, I mean, it's only one study. I don't know whether you should trust it as much as all the other research that I've seen. So obviously we probably need to look into it more, but it's particularly relevant in promotions that are more ethically complex because it didn't have much of an effect in the no harm, no foul dimension, which was not very ethically complex. Giving immediate feedback on positive impact that people are doing might also elicit repeat behaviours to reinforce internal locus of control. But basically, segmentation with people that have high internal locus of control, if you know that they do, needs to be tailored with a bit of caution, because on the one hand, they are likely to use moral disengagement less. So emphasising personal impact and control can help minimise rationalisations, but on the other hand, the increased locus of control increases unethical behaviour as the individual makes up their own mind regarding the ethical societal norms. And that's it. So I have got examples of the scales in the appendices if you actually want to see the questions that were asked. And sorry I had to rush through everything for you, but that's it. And you're now done with all of the presentations. One workshop to go, everybody.
Fabulous. So what questions do we have? Yes, Mike.
Thanks very much. It's really fascinating, and I wonder what you think about this in the context of people littering. So there's a campaign in New South Wales that's existed for many years, which it basically says, "Don't be a tosser, you're a tosser," you know, and I just wonder your thoughts on how effective that might be. You know, in terms of whether people can accept that, as being true of themselves, or something that I can see in other people, but, in a sense of, sorry, I'm not being very, so if I'm dropping litter, it's because I'm in a hurry. There isn't a bin there. It's not because I'm a tosser. If someone else is dropping litter, they can be a tosser. I'm not going to give them I'm not going to allow them the excuse of, being late, being in a hurry, this, that, and the other. But
maybe it'd be more effective to encourage people to pick things up. I run this test. I mean, it's not relative to the literature necessarily. I run this test near my school. I live across the road from a school, and I pick litter up myself. Yeah. It's one of my bugbears. And sometimes, every now and then, I'll wait to see if anyone else is going to do it. And they never do. It always ends up being me, and I find that intriguing. Yeah.
So I think it's when poor behaviour or unethical behaviour is sort of personalised like that, does it become less effective? I think that's what I'm asking.
Because the problem with the moral disengagement is that people use moral disengagement to explain away their behaviour so that it's not their fault. They'll either, the agency locus diffuses the responsibility to being somebody else's. It's a group problem, so, why should it be me? Somebody else can pick it up. Or it's the government's fault because they don't have enough bins. Or it's, and that's why moral disengagement is so effective. And it can be used so much. It's not actually, it hasn't been tested to the point that we don't know how much it gets embedded in people. So if you use it regularly, does it become so seamless you don't even know that you're doing it? It's your new moral norm, or whether you just continually morally disengage. My gut feeling is the former, that it does get embedded to a point that you don't even realise it's transferred to your new. But that hasn't been tested. That's difficult to test. There is one study that does show people the negative consequences of their moral disengagement, and that then does lead to more positive behaviours. So that might be something that could work. I'm not sure I really answered your question though. Yes, Rob? Oh no, sorry, I don't get to choose.
Oh, sorry, I managed to get the microphone first. Sorry about it. I love ethics, I love geeking out over it, so thank you so much for being so thorough with all the information. I loved it. And it made me think about, the difference between, positive ethics and normative ethics, and you're kind of looking at positive ethics and as it's the behaviour. But then the concepts of beliefs versus norms, i.e. ethical norms, right? And they're all slightly different things. And when you looked at the 4 boxes with the loci, with the different, that actually made me think about a connection between, in sociology, they have this thing with that myths, legends, and fairy tales are what people use to do that, the moral disengagement, but people use those to explain their behaviour and those, as you say, the cognitive dissonance that occurs. So you think about Sleeping Beauty, and it makes it heroic to kiss a woman that's passed out, for instance. Yeah. Maybe that's not but it's the same kind of thing. And I thought, really, that's something that's really practical about what you found, because those particular loci in social marketing messages, or kind of pinpointing those, shows what you're saying. Yeah, I did. There's another paper. The first paper I did actually tested the different loci separately. An agency locus actually had a positive effect on behaviour. So they can operate a little bit differently. And you're right about the storytelling, because they are they're like internal narratives. They are stories. So there is a lot of crossover with the storytelling. I think as a result, I'm very attracted to the storytelling literature. There was the care archetypes that I was sitting in and listening to, I thought was really interesting, because some of those techniques that people use, I think, be very effective as a result of the sort of countering the negative moral disengagement. I think they'd be good techniques to put together and see how they work.
Thanks, Robyn. That was super interesting. love to spend a bit more time reading the full presentation. I'm curious how you think about what gets defined as ethical versus unethical behaviour, like which acts.
Say that again, sorry?
I'm curious as to how you think about what gets defined as unethical behaviour. Like murder, bad most of the time. Drug taking, I mean, that's a bit different. Some people would say that's very unethical. Others would say it's, freedom of choice. But do you have like some kind of framework for thinking about what gets defined as unethical?
Well, in the context of this research, it's very specific to the scale. So the unethical behaviour in this one is specific to environmental misbehaviours. So, and if you were looking at unethical misdeeds in marketplace behaviour is things like, so did I go through those already? So so the illegal dimensions, returning damaged goods when the damage was your fault. The passive dimension's slightly less bad because it's moving into a residence, finding that the cable TV is still hooked up and then using it without paying it. That one's a bit old, I guess. Or lying about a child's age to get a lower price. It's not quite as bad as stealing, but it's still, active and legal dimensions is you using a coupon that's been expired. So that's specifically related to engaging with the business. So everything that you're measuring when you're measuring unethical behaviour, you need to customise for being specific to that context, I think. Whereas the moral disengagement scale is much more general. It tests a lot of different. So this one here, it's okay to steal to take care of your family's needs. Euphemistic labouring is sharing test questions is just a way of helping your friends. Advantageous comparison is damaging some properties, no big deal when you consider that others are beating up people. So there's all these different examples that have been developed to make these scales quality measures. Did that answer it? Oh yeah, sort of. But
you just need to read the paper.
It's going to be culture and individually dependent. But I think one of the questions that I wonder, and one of the things that I thought about a lot in the AI conversation we had is, are we moving from a society where societal norms were better understood to, and this literature indicates a bit, that we are moving towards a society where personal norms are getting a little bit more individually defined, and truth is being more individually defined, and how's that going to play out? Is truth even important anymore? Because, we all in this room obviously think that whether it's one truth or multiple truths, we still think trying to define those truths is vitally important. I think that's something we're all here to define, but I'm just not sure that people outside this room feel that same way anymore. That's one of the things that frightens me the most about AI. Getting off topic, but...
We've got time for just one more. I know I always tell this story, but going into some prisons and talking to people who've done horrific things, they're always able to provide a good reason for it. And
Pretty
so
clever at moral disengagement is what you're saying.
Is what I'm saying, yeah. And we talk to a lot of people that do illegal and non-compliant behaviours, and generally it's not their fault. No. They're in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people, or whatever it may be. So fascinating. Yeah. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. And look, I'm thrilled to announce it's now afternoon tea. So let's all go and grab something yummy, and then we're coming back for the final workshops before we summarise our 2 wonderful days at the conference. Thanks very much.